we go back. I'm your host, Bryan Abou Chacra, and on this week's episode, we will be reviewing Question Mark and 3 Minutes, the 21st and 22nd episodes from Season 2 of Lost. We open up to a dream sequence where Echo gets told by Ana Lucia that he needs to help John, which takes him into the hatch where he sees Yemi, and Yemi tells him that the work being done in this hatch is the most important work and that John needs to take him to the question mark. These little opening sequences are always really cool when they're in a flashback or in some sort of vision because you get to learn something really interesting about the characters. This takes us into the jungle where Sawyer and Jack and Kate are coming back to the hatch after realizing what Ana Lucia was planning to do. And I love that Sawyer calls Henry Gale the artist formerly known as Henry Gale, keeping up his motif of making a nickname for everyone, even though Henry Gale isn't even this guy's real name. And just as they are coming up on the hatch, Michael once again conveniently timed bursts out and is there, starting to lie about everything that went on. He says that he shot Ana Lucia and Libby, Henry did, and that Michael is shot as well. Kind of like what Saeed did, but I don't know if there's necessarily a connection there. I just wanted to point that was a very similar situation. In the hatch, we find Ana Lucia and Libby dead, but surprise, Libby is actually not dead, and when we get that turnaround shot to Michael with the music building up, I think that is perfect. You can get that same feeling of emotion, that gut feeling of, oh shit, he might get caught in doing something wrong, and we still don't know why he did it. Jack is ready to go after Henry, but Sawyer points out that someone has to stay behind to take care of Libby because there is no other doctor. Echo offers to go, and as he walks up, I want you guys to pay attention to the dartboard behind him. The darts are placed in the numbers 4, 8, 15, and 16. I think that is awesome. I didn't notice that ever before, but that's awesome that they keep putting these little Easter eggs in the back, and I looked it up online to try to find if anybody else had seen it. I'm sure somebody else has, but the only reason that I was able to see it is because I happened to pause it right then. And I don't know if anybody else has taken that time to look at it. There is one more in the bullseye, but in the scoring of darts, it's not significant to the rest of the numbers. Still, the fact that they put that detail in there is really awesome. This takes us into our first flashback where we actually see Echo as a priest. He is taking somebody's confession and seems completely disinterested, but we do find out that this person is helping him get his papers to go to America. Although it is a little bit seedy and underhanded, he is trying to continue what his brother was doing. As he's talking to this guy, we find out from his superior that there has been a girl named Charlotte who drowned and then woke up 2 days later, and it is supposed to be a miracle. The mother even comes in and talks about it, but Echo will be the one who is conducting the miracle investigation, for the reason that Echo is very cynical and does not believe that these miracles can occur. So his Monsignor wants somebody who could be very objective and will only take the true evidence once he sees it into consideration. So I think that little piece is really cool. We get to learn something about Echo, that he's very objective and that he will not just make an emotional decision. And this takes us back to the jungle where Echo is asking John about the question mark, and John refuses to help him. So he gets knocked out, and upon Locke waking up, Echo tells Locke that Ana Lucia wants to help him. He says that the work being done in your hatch is important, but Locke denies ownership of the hatch, and he's, I feel, doing exactly what his father, what Anthony Cooper, did to him. I don't know if you guys picked up on that. What are your thoughts on it? Let me know. I always want to hear about it. We go back podcast@gmail.com. That takes us into our flashback where Echo is interviewing the Undertaker, and the autopsy tape is being played for him, and you can clearly hear her waking up in the middle of the autopsy. This guy is doing his normal routine autopsy, and all of a sudden this little girl wakes up and starts freaking out about what's going on. And I think that the reaction of the Undertaker shows that this might actually be miraculous, and that Mr. Echo is really taking into consideration everything that he's seeing here. Back in the hatch, Jack is realizing that Libby is a lost cause and wants to be able to make her suffering end. And so he tells Sawyer that he needs the heroin so that she doesn't have to continue to suffer, but asks Kate to go with him so that he can discover where the guns are. And you can tell Sawyer is really, really annoyed by this situation. However, this takes us to the beach where we find out that Sawyer's stash has been under his tent the entire time. And I love this idea of hiding in plain sight. What better place to put something than right under where you sleep? Nobody's going to guess that it's there. And he says that to Kate. He says, "Fooled you, didn't I?" And as they're walking out, Hurley comes up and has to be told about what happened to Libby. Which takes us to the jungle where Echo sees Yemi again, but this is actually from John's perspective. In a dream of his, he follows Yemi up to the top of the vines where the plane used to be, and then he says, "Wake up, John." Echo seems to already know what happened in Locke's vision, but still asks him what he saw and finds out that he needs to climb the vines. In our flashback, we see Echo who goes to see the girl, and her father comes out and is revealed to be the psychic that spoke to Claire. And we realize here by his confession that he is a fraud, but it's clear that he saw something though when he was doing his reading with Claire. And I think that that's why his reaction, if you look back to it and you're like, what was wrong with him? Why did he seem to be so upset with it? I don't think it was the vision itself. I think it's because he did not expect to be able to actually see something. The psychic tells Echo that his wife is doing this to spite him, that his daughter's body went into a shutdown mode, and that she woke up 2 days later, and the Undertaker is just trying to cover up his mistake. This explanation seems enough for Echo, and he says that he will report back to his Monseigneur that there was no miracle. We now return to Echo in the jungle, who has reached the top of the vines and is finally able to see the question mark below, which reveals a hatch underneath the plane the whole time. And if you didn't notice, the hatch door is in the shape of the Dharma logo. This takes us back to the Swan hatch, where Jack is not superstitious at all and breaks the Virgin Mary statue. I don't know if this was intended to be a comparison to the conversation that Jack and Locke, had earlier in this season, but I absolutely believe it has at least a little bit of a tie-in, because we know that Jack doesn't follow any sort of superstitions. Hurley is now there and has to suffer in front of Michael, and I think that this shows you the humanity of Michael's decision and the weight of it on him, that you can tell he is not happy with the decisions that he's had to make this entire time. Back in the question mark, they find that this room has a bunch of monitors for surveillance, and one of those is of their hatch. They find notebooks and other materials to help surveillance, as well as another orientation video. They sit down and watch it together, and now I wanted to point out that the doctor's name has changed from Dr. Marvin Candle to now Dr. Mark Wickman. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, that's 2 candle references, and I wonder why. Wick being the wick of the candle, and then obviously the other itself. This station is a monitoring station for the posterity and for refinement, is what we find out, and they are observing a psychological experiment, and this is just going to question everything that John has been doing, especially considering the fact that he's now had Henry come in and tell him that the button is not real and that they don't need to press it. Echo wants to watch it again, much like John, but John is very cynical. He has flipped the script, and like Jack, does not really believe in anything that he's seeing anymore. Echo pushes the point that the reason to push the button is because they believe that they are meant to, and I think that this is a very important character piece on the whole series of Lost, but especially for Mr. Echo and John. We're talking about these two characters having a conversation about not mixing coincidence and fate, or for fate, and now having a conversation of doing things because they believe that they are meant to. And why I think that's important compared to anything else that we've seen in the show is that is an internal motivation. When you believe you are meant to do something, that's your own decision. That, I think, is what free will is being discussed in this conversation. So doing it isn't because they're told to, but it's because that they feel that this is their purpose or that they are meant to. However, Locke, as we can see, who's exceptionally volatile, disagrees. He says his whole life is meaningless, just like the button. And that takes us back to the flashbacks. In the airport, we see that drowned woman meet Mr. Echo at the airport at Oceanic and tells him that Yemi thinks that he is a great priest and that he will see him again soon. And this, I believe, is to show you that her miracle was real, that she actually died and that she actually went back and met Yemi. You might be able to argue that it was the psychic who maybe fed her the information, but you can tell that he does not want anything to do with the idea of this being a miracle, because I think he's being spooked out already by what happened with Claire. You know that this is close to when the plane left Sydney, so that must be sometime after he met Claire and gave her her vision if she was pregnant for 9 months. But we still don't know. Either way, I think that's the purpose. She is telling us and Echo that what happened to her actually happened to her. And I think that that is a fun way to do it. We come back to what we now know as the Pearl, and Echo describes how the plane got to the island. Not their plane, but the Beechcraft that has crashed above them. And that the work here really is important, and that he believes it's more important than any other thing that they could ever possibly be doing. And if John won't keep it up, he will. In the Swan, we find Jack, who gives the heroin to Libby, and Hurley is there to help comfort her as she leaves. He apologizes in the most sweetest, wonderful person ever, takes responsibility, says that he is sorry that he forgot the blankets, because if he hadn't, she would never have gone back to the hatch, and she would never have gotten shot. And it's such a sad moment. I really feel for Hurley in this scene. It's so sad. And as they're watching her die, she becomes lucid for just a moment and says the word Michael. And she looks absolutely terrified. And you can see that Jack confuses that terror for worry for Michael instead of Michael. And this is really chilling and daunting. And then, sadly, she dies. Everyone is sad and crying except for Jack, who is pissed, and I love this ending shot of Michael standing in the armory next to Ana Lucia, looking at what he did, and the computer ticking off as the episode ends. We're now on to 3 minutes, where we are going to see the entire perspective of where Michael has been this entire time that he has been lost. And this will serve as our flashback for this episode. We see Walt on the computer guides Michael on where to go, and that is the setup for how he attacked John and Jack and stole a gun to go after him. Present time, Michael burns the list with everybody's name on it. Jack, Hurley, Kate, and James Ford, which is Sawyer. All of those people are in the hatch right now, which is pretty coincidental. Hurley is pissed and points out the obvious that they still haven't even buried these people, while Michael is ready to go out on this expedition right away. We go 13 days back, where Michael finds one of these guys pissing out in the jungle and then gets captured and knocked out by the man with the beard, who I will call Zeke because that's what Sawyer calls him. And that takes us back to the hatch, where we see him cleaning up Ana Lucia's blood on the floor, which I believe is a way to show that he is taking responsibility for what he has done. Echo comes by to help Michael clean up the blood, and Michael asks him about how he's a priest and if he believes in hell. When he does that, though, Echo shares this story that is very similar to the situation that Michael is in right now, and tells him basically that he's talking about the difference between being sorry for what you did and feeling guilty for what you've had to do so far. I think it's really a difference of actually feeling sorry and remorseful and understanding why what you did was wrong, rather than just being guilty for being caught. And that's a big difference to me, at least, because somebody can make a mistake and they can do something horrible, but it doesn't mean that they can't atone for it and feel sorry for it. That's something that I think is really important, that people need to recognize in general, but also in the show Lost. You see that with Charlie when he does what he did with the baby, because, Charlie wasn't trying to hurt him, but he was just trying to do what he thought was best for him. And speaking of Charlie, and doing what's best for the baby. In this episode, Charlie brings up a vaccine box that he found on the pallet, and he gives it to Claire. This part shows you that Charlie is now a lot better off overall in understanding his boundaries, realizing that he doesn't need to constantly be pushing Claire. And I think that this is a really good change for Charlie, especially in this episode. We now have Michael returning to the beach, and we see that everybody is happy to have him back, which I think just drives home that point of feeling guilty for what you did, because everybody's so excited that his return is finally happened, but they don't realize what has gone on in the hatch. Really, really big moment for everybody there. This takes us into our flashback where we get to see the other's side of the meeting at the line, and we find out that Alex is talking to Michael. And we get to realize who Alex is. That is the girl who is taking care of Claire at the hatch. So this little bit of a mystery of, is Alex Danielle's daughter, is being supported by hearing her be called Alex here. We now come back to the beach where Jack and Sawyer are at his tent getting the guns. Sawyer asks about what he and Kate were doing in the jungle, Jack and Kate, and Jack very honestly answers, "We were caught in a net." However, this is one of my favorite jokes in the entire show. Sawyer doesn't believe that that is the honest truth. He thinks he's being coy in the same way that Sawyer is. Again, perspective. When you see the world in one way, you think everybody else is going to do it that same way as well. But really, the fact of the matter, as we all know, is they got caught in a real net. But Sawyer believes that they actually had sex in the jungle, and it's really funny to me. This ends up coming back later in the episode. If you didn't notice it, I don't know how you did. It was really funny. Anyway, they come out of the tent, and Saeed finds them and wants to come along and ends up getting a gun from Sawyer and will be going. However, I wanted to point out the tension between everyone here. It's just so hot. Everybody thinks they know what to do. Nobody's stopping to talk about what's going on or question any of the circumstances that they're in. And this is just a lot of infighting that I really never paid attention to the first few times I watched, because I kind of had my biases. I liked Sawyer a lot, so I always kind of sided with certain characters. But trying to see it objectively, it's really interesting that there's just all this messy fighting and bad tension between everybody on the beach. It's like, no, aren't we supposed to live together, die alone? Which is actually the name of our next episode. Now, I did want to point something out here that I personally appreciated, which was the way that this whole scene was shot. From them coming out of the tent, to whipping around to Saeed, to whipping back to Jack, and then tracking back with the Steadicam. I think that that's a really well executed shot. I really suggest going back and watching it just to see how on point the camera work is. It's really cool. It's nice that they put a little bit more into the shots so that you have something dynamic to look at. Now, one thing did stick with me about this conversation. Saeed does make a point that it is actually their call and not Michael's whether or not they go, because their lives are the ones that are being risked. He doesn't get to just say, these are the guys who come and nobody else. I think that that's a really important interaction. I think at this point you can start to see the doubts that Saeed is having towards Michael throughout this whole episode anyways. We now come back to the hatch where Charlie confronts Echo about where he's been, and I totally get Charlie's response to Echo telling him that this is what he's doing now, that Charlie has to find his own thing and the church is no longer being built. I would have the absolute same response as Charlie here. It's like, you disappear, you don't tell me what's going on, and now you're just asking me to move your stuff for you? Come on, like, you aren't even asking me to at least come here and sit at the button and press it. You're telling me I have to trek your stuff to the hatch. And what I believe that's really getting at is how devout and committed Echo is. He will not stray from his path, no matter what. And he doesn't necessarily consider the emotions of anybody else. He just knows what his path is, and he's going to follow it. You could see that back when he was in Nigeria as a drug lord or whatever, a gang leader, and as he was when he was a priest off island in Sydney, and he was trying to be a very just and good priest. We come to the flashback where the camp is exactly how Michael had described it, and we see the hatch, we see that it's all women and children, they're all run down. Like I said, everything is exactly how it is described by Michael when he comes back to the hatch. However, we are now going to be introduced to my least favorite character in the show. This is one of the things that Lost did that I never ever liked, and this is the character of Mrs. Clue. I think that she is just a mystery piece, which is maybe the point. That's why her name is Mrs. Clue. You think, oh, there might be something deeper to read into? I don't know, maybe there was. I really just never liked her character. It was all just very bullshit responses, never really considering what anybody else said to her, and she just kind of talks through everyone, which is evident in this scene here with Michael. So let's talk a little bit about that. She has a lot of questions about Walt, but he doesn't seem to know any of the answers, and Miss Clue, of course, just continues to talk through him. Says the same line that his wife's lawyer had said about, for somebody who wants his son so much, you don't seem to know much about him, which was pretty messed up. We now return to the beach where Michael uninvites Saeed from this trek, and Saeed reluctantly agrees, and I think this is the moment where it's solidified that there is a compromise for Michael with the camp. And then that takes us to Charlie, who is working on the church, and then Vincent leads him to the drugs. But I love that there is this closure, this strength. As I said, Charlie seems to be better. He seems to have been able to grow out of what has happened to him with these drugs, and he throws all of the drugs away. He finds John on the beach, who is watching him, and I feel like this is a little bit of a redemption for Charlie, because he sees that now Locke is completely lost, whereas Charlie is no longer addicted to his drugs. I feel like this is his redemption for him there. We come back to the hatch where Echo is at his post entering in the numbers, and Sawyer tells Jack about how he got caught in a net with Ana Lucia. And I think at that point it dawns on him what Sawyer was saying earlier when they were in the tent. But Sawyer reveals that Jack is the closest thing to a friend that Sawyer has on this island, and because he slept with her, I mean, you can see that this is an emotional thing for Sawyer. I don't know if he had any extra feelings for her or whatever, but I think he definitely has compassion, and he is a human, and he doesn't like to see people's lives be stolen from them, and you can tell that it bothers him what happened, and that he's trying to communicate that to Jack. That's what he means by you're the closest thing to a friend I've got. Although I would argue Hurley is probably a closer friend to him rather than a rival, which is what Jack would be. Or at least in my opinion, I've always seen them as butting heads. But I feel like Jack butts heads with everybody, so who knows? I want to take us back to the beach for the very short scene where we see Hurley and Kate digging the graves for Ana Lucia and Libby, and I love the desperation that you can tell Michael has. He is just grasping at any straw to try to get Hurley to come with him, because he knows that he needs to bring all of them to the others. Otherwise, he's not going to get what he wants and get his son off the island, which is shown in the flashback where Mike is being held hostage, just like Henry in the Swan Station, but now it's Mike. But we find out that if he brings these people to the others, they will let him and his son off the island. They bring Walt in and they let him talk to Walt for only 3 minutes, and Walt describes them as pretenders. He says they aren't who they say they are, and then they end up taking Walt away. They tell Michael that he is going to be sent to release the man and bring these 4 people back, or he will never see his son again, and we see a very broken down Michael. This will take us back to the beach where everybody is gathered around for the funeral. We see Locke off to the side, cut his splints, and walk off. He seems to have healed completely, much like what Rose had said in the previous episode. And we also see Jack and Saeed, who are walking to the funeral, and Saeed issues a warning to Jack. He says that Michael has been compromised and that they need to create their advantage based off of that. Jack delivers his words for Ana Lucia, and I really appreciate that he actually speaks at this funeral. I don't know if he spoke at any of the other ones. Please let me know if you paid attention to that. I really didn't consider it before this, but I don't believe he's spoken at anybody else's funeral so far on the island. Let me know, wegobackpodcast@gmail.com, whether or not he has. I would love to hear from you about that. We also have Hurley, who tries to speak for Libby, but he says that Libby helped him and a lot of people. It shows Claire, how she helped Claire regain her memory and know what happened to her for those 2 weeks. And he says that she helped him. You can see that this greatly affects Hurley, and he finally agrees to go on this expedition, even though he wanted nothing to do with it before. We also have a little bit of a moment here that I wanted to bring up where Claire grabs Charlie's hand, which I think is a nice little gesture that signifies that Claire's petty disagreement with him over the drugs and the lying is not more important than the actual relationships that they have, because they might die, and that Charlie has done as much as he could and put his life on the line to help save Claire as many times as he could because he cares about her. And while you should never lie to anyone, sometimes you do it because you have to. I think that that is a theme for this whole episode, that you do the things that you have to do because you're trying to do what's right. And while the method isn't always okay, maybe the intent is what's the most important part of it. And then the surprise finish where we see a boat approaching the island. Now, this boat could mean a number of things. It could mean rescue. It could mean that the others are coming. We know that they have access to a boat. It could mean a million other things, and we won't know until we watch next week's episode, which we will get to in a week. So let's get to our emails. I always am happy to read your emails on the show. Thank you guys so much for sending in your thoughts, your comments, and for leaving comments on the YouTube and talking to me at all the conventions and bringing up the show to me. I really love it. This is what I'm doing the show for. I want to build this community with you guys where we just kind of talk back and forth. I appreciate that I get emails every week. So thank you so much. Email me at wegobackpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to read and respond to you guys, especially because a lot of times you guys have told me something that I might not have even paid attention to. The best part is perspectives. Like I said, your guys' perspective will always be different than mine. Our first email comes from Jess. They say, the dialogue in ? Is absolutely brilliant, although it's almost a given since the main plot centers on Locke and Echo's quest to find one of the hatches the blast door map points to. There's a lot of philosophizing here, but it all feels intelligent and on par with its ambition, which is more than can be said for a lot of other film and television. Echo and Locke's conversation are genuinely thought-provoking, and Echo's monologue about Yemi and the importance of the work John has been doing is one of the best monologues on the show thus far. ? Is a knockout of an episode. It's a stunning script, excelling at drama like few other episodes do, and subtly but strongly developing both characters and mythology. It provokes thought about more than just the mysteries of the island and what the hell Dharma is doing. Asking questions about the nature of the faith and belief and showing many sides of human nature, both good and bad. I agree entirely. Very good points as well. I hadn't thought of a lot of the things that you said in there, and I really appreciate that you always take a more analytical approach to your emails, talking more about the feel and the writing of the episodes. Thank you so much, Jess. Really appreciate your emails. Keep writing in. Our next email comes from Ryan. He's referencing my comments from last week when I spoke about Christian going to Australia to die. He's not going back, he says. I can completely see why you say that, but I feel he went there to try to start anew. We know he has a woman in Australia and a daughter he was trying to see. Maybe instead of going to die, he was all in on trying to rekindle this Aussie family and do better this time. Although from that scene, clearly that would be an uphill battle. He does also point out that although Libby did end up dying, she did seemingly come back from the dead, as the psychic's daughter apparently did as well. Not quite sure if that is a tie-in, but that is a good observation that I had not noticed on my own. Really appreciate that. He also asks why the episode was called 3 minutes. That's how much time Walt had with his father in the other's camp. Last email comes from Joey. They say, remember watching this. If memory serves correct, there was a commercial to call and learn more about the Hanso Foundation. Regretfully, I never followed up. The doctor on the tapes had a different name of Wickman instead of Candle, and the first name, I believe as well, is different. In John's dream, Mr. Echo following Yemi up the cliff, Mr. Echo has a limp. Now, I did not notice that at all. So what he's saying here is that as Mr. Echo is walking in this flashback where we see him, or not this flashback, but this vision, he has a limp in the same leg that John's fracture is in. And that is not something I ever noticed before. Thank you so much. Joey, thank you so much for pointing out something to me that I haven't ever seen in the episode. Guys, I want you to point out as much as you can that I haven't seen, or anything that I've ever been wrong about that you disagree about, or anything. Email me, wegobackpodcast@gmail.com, for anything that you want me to discuss, see, read, whatever. I love it. I appreciate you guys taking all that time. Next week, we will be reviewing the season finale of season 2, which will be Live Together, Die Alone. Really look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about that. And until next week, you guys have a great day and take care.